The spring twilight draped itself over Stillwater, Oklahoma, like a velvet curtain, the sky ablaze with hues of apricot and lavender as the day surrendered to dusk. Out at the Sullivan homestead, a weathered sprawl of farmland just beyond the town's sleepy edges, joy hung thick in the air, woven into the fabric of a wedding celebration. Lanterns dangled from gnarled oak branches, their amber glow swaying like captured stars above a dance floor carved from rough-hewn planks. The breeze carried whispers of blooming honeysuckle and the smoky tang of a pig roasting over an open pit, while the murmur of voices, boots stomping, glasses clinking filled the evening with a heartbeat all its own. This was Lily Sullivan's moment, her union with Caleb Reed. A day stitched with dreams and a quiet thread of longing for the father she'd lost to the shadows. Lily lingered near the fringes of the revelry, a vision in a denim gown that flowed like a river over her curves, unpretentious yet radiant, its hem kissed with whispers of lace. Her golden hair tumbled free, catching the wind in soft waves, and her emerald eyes shimmered with a cocktail of elation and unspoken melancholy. Around her neck hung a locket, its silver surface scratched and dented, cradling a snapshot of her daddy, his lopsided grin a relic she'd carried since childhood. She twirled a strand of hair absently, her boots scuffing the earth, the weight of memory tugging at her like an old song she couldn't quite place. Caleb ambled over, a lanky figure wrapped in a chestnut vest, sleeves shoved up to his elbows, his chestnut hair tousled beneath a worn Stetson. He draped an arm around her, his touch steady as the horizon. "You're glowin', darlin'," he said, his voice a low, honey drawl that could melt the hardest days. "You good?" She nestled into him, her cheek brushing his shoulder, soaking in his warmth. "Yeah," she murmured, her tone tender but tinged with a wistful edge. "Just wishin' he could see this. Thought he'd be here, you know? Strummin' that guitar, spinnin' me round till I'm dizzy. Sounds foolish, don't it?" "Ain't foolish one bit," Caleb replied, pressing his lips to her crown. "I'd lasso the moon to bring him back for ya, Lil." He flashed a crooked grin, nudging her playfully. "Speakin' of tunes, where's that band? Shouldn't they be warmin' up by now?" Lily's brow furrowed, a shadow crossing her face. "They flaked, called it off last night. Some big city gig stole 'em. Figured you'd rigged up a jukebox or something." Caleb's eyes danced with a spark of mischief, his grin stretching wide. "Oh, I've got something better up my sleeve. Found it last night, pure gold, darlin'. You're gonna lose your boots over this." She cocked her head, suspicion mingling with curiosity. "What do you cook up, Caleb Reed? Don't tell me you dragged some honky-tonk straggler out here." "Hush now," he teased, squeezing her hand. "Wait and see. This first dance? It's gonna rattle the stars." Before she could pry further, a ripple of stillness swept through the crowd, heads swiveling toward the makeshift stage, a slab of plywood propped by hay bales, flanked by a lone amp humming with static. Lily squinted, her pulse quickening. A figure emerged from the dusk, and he was a jolt against the soft edges of her day. Tall and lean as a fence post, he was cloaked in a leather jacket so worn it looked like it'd been stitched by time itself, his jeans frayed to wisps. His hair was a wild mane of silver and chestnut, spilling over a face carved with stories' deep lines, a hawkish nose, eyes shadowed by a past she couldn't fathom. In his arms, he cradled a Fender Stratocaster, its red finish chipped and scarred, a battered warrior plugged into the amp with a hiss that split the air. "Who in tarnation is that?" Lily breathed, her gaze flicking to Caleb. "Just watch," he said, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. "He's south gonna light this place up." The stranger fumbled with the mic stand, his hands trembling like leaves in a storm. The crowd's murmurs buzzing. "Who's this drifter? Looks like he rolled outta a gutter." Lily's stomach churned, a flicker of unease threading through her. This wasn't the polished picture she'd painted for her wedding. Not this rough-hewn interloper with his junkyard guitar. But then he struck the strings, and the world tilted. A riff exploded from the Strat electric, fierce, a rock blues growl that roared through the twilight like a thunderclap. It was Lily's tune, a jagged, soulful burst her daddy had crafted for her. A sound that rocked her to sleep as a kid, wild and alive in every note. Her breath snagged, her fingers digging into Caleb's arm till she felt bone. Caleb, she gasped, voice splintering. That's my daddy's riff. Caleb's grin wavered, his brow knitting. What? Lil, you sure? It's his, she said, her words tumbling out in a rush, quaking with wonder. He wrote it for me, Lily's tune. God almighty. Caleb, that's my daddy's sound. The stranger played on, lost in the riff's raw pulse, the notes tearing through the air with a grit that matched his weathered hands. Lily's heart thundered, a wild stampede in her chest, her tea glass slipping to shatter on the dirt, shards glinting like fallen stars. She surged forward, boots pounding the earth, weaving through the stunned crowd, her mom's wide eyes, friends' gaping mouths, strangers in their Sunday best all fading to a blur. All she saw was him, this man who stepped out of her dreams, coaxing her childhood from those strings. Hey, she shouted, voice fracturing as she hit the stage's edge. Hey, stop please. His fingers stumbled, the riff collapsing into a jagged buzz as the amp squealed. He lifted his head, and their gazes collided, a spark igniting across the years. His face was a map of hardship, but there it was, the scar above his brow, the tilt of his jaw, the echo of a grin she memorized. His breath hitched, a name clawing its way up his throat. Lily, he croaked, voice a gravelly whisper swallowed by the hum. My Lily, Daddy? She sobbed, tears carving rivers down her cheeks. The guitar clattered to the stage, a hollow clang ringing out, and his legs wobbled. She vaulted up, her dress catching on a nail, and flung herself into his arms. He caught her, his hold fierce and unsteady, a lifeline against the tide of lost time. She pressed her face to his chest, the leather cracked and smelling of dust and ash. But it was him, Hank Sullivan, her daddy, flesh and bone. Daddy, she cried, voice muffled in his jacket. You're here. You're really here. Lily, he rasped, voice breaking as he crushed her closer. My little girl, I found you. Didn't he even know you were missing from me? His tears fell hot against her scalp, his body shuddering with a flood he couldn't name. I'm sorry, sugar, so damn sorry. A stillness gripped the crowd, thick as the dusk, until a sharp cry pierced it raw, trembling. Lily glanced back to see her mom, Ellen, shoving through, her face ashen, eyes wide with a fragile dawn. She clutched her throat, voice a thread. Hank? Sweet Jesus, is that you? He turned, Lily still in his arms, and his chest seized. Ellen, he breathed, her name a fragile hymn. It's me, darlin'. I'm here. He stepped toward her, Lily at his side, and Ellen rushed in, enveloping them both, her sobs a melody of relief and ruin. I thought you'd slipped away forever. Ellen wept, her voice a tangle of joy and ache. Thought I'd buried you in my heart. I was gone, he said, voice thick as mud. But I'm back, found my way to ya. Caleb climbed the stage, his boots heavy on the wood, eyes glistening with a quiet storm. Hank, he said, voice taut. I had no clue. Caught your riff on a Nashville corner last night, knew it'd shake this place. Didn't he know it'd shake the world? Hank gripped his shoulder, a rough hand steady with gratitude. You, he said, voice gravel and grace. You strung me back to M. Bless you, son, bless you. Caleb's throat bobbed, his hand clasping Lily's. She's my everything, he said, soft and sure. Now she's got hers whole again. The hush erupted then, a swell of claps and hollers rolling like thunder, not for the riff, but for a miracle carved from dust and strings. Lily held tight to her daddy, her mom, her man, the universe shrinking to this jagged circle of love reborn. She looked up at Hank, voice quivering but iron strong. You came back, Daddy. You're mine again. He swiped a tear from her cheek, his calloused fingers shaking. Never stopped playing for ya, sugar. Not a single night. As the twilight deepened and the crowd's cheers softened into the breeze, a mystery lingered, heavy and tantalizing. Where had Hank Sullivan wandered all these years? What storms had he weathered? And how had that riff, that electric lifeline, carried him back to this moment? Hey, why all? If this tale's strumming your heartstrings, don't sleep on that subscribe button. We've got a wild journey ahead. Toss us a comment. Where do you reckon Hank has been hiding all this time? We're itching to hear your wildest hunches. Let us swap some theories. More S coming your way soon. Stick with us. The autumn evening draped Stillwater, Oklahoma, in a quilt of amber and rust, the kind of twilight that smelled like crisp leaves and chimney smoke. Inside the Sullivan house, a weathered clapboard nestled on the edge of town. The air was thick with warmth, a symphony of crackling logs in the fireplace and the buttery aroma of Elena's pumpkin bread wafting from the kitchen. The living room was a cozy chaos. A sagging couch draped with a patchwork throw, a coffee table cluttered with Lily's crayons and dog-eared comics, and a rug worn thin by years of boots and bare feet. Outside, the wind teased the maples, sending golden leaves pirouetting against the window panes, a dance as old as the plains themselves. Hank Sullivan perched on a stool by the hearth, his electric guitar, a cherry-red Fender Stratocaster, cradled in his lap like a restless child. His hair was a tousled mop of chestnut, streaked with the first hints of gray, and his flannel shirt hung loose over a frame lean from hard work and harder play. His fingers, calloused from strings and sawdust, coaxed a riff from the Strat, a gritty rock blues pulse that thrummed through the room like a heartbeat. It was Lily's tune, a jagged little melody he de-spun for his daughter, a sound as wild as the Oklahoma wind and as tender as her sleepy giggles. Lily, barely 6, sprawled on the rug at his feet, her blonde curls spilling over a pillow she dragged from her bed. She wore a faded t-shirt with a cartoon pony, her green eyes wide and gleaming as she watched him play. The firelight danced across her face, painting her in flickers of gold. "Daddy," she chirped, her voice a bright thread in the dusk. "Keep playing my tune, okay? Don't ever stop." Hank grinned, his eyes crinkling at the corners, a spark of mischief in their hazel depths. "You got it, sugar," he said, his drawl warm as the embers. "This one's yours till the stars burn out." He leaned down, ruffling her hair, and let the riff roll again, sharp, electric, a storm bottled in strings. Ellen poked her head out from the kitchen, her apron dusted with flour, a wooden spoon in hand like a conductor's baton. She was a sturdy woman, her auburn hair pinned up in a messy knot, her face etched with the quiet strength of someone who weathered plenty. "You're gonna spoil her rotten, Hank Sullivan," she teased, her voice a soft lilt over the sizzle of the oven. "She'll be demmed in a private show every night till she's gray." "Wouldn't he be the worst gig?" Hank shot back, winking. "Beats sawin' lumber for a livin'." Ellen chuckled, shaking her head. "That bread's almost done. Want a slice before you head out?" "Nah, save me some," he said, easing the guitar onto its stand as Lily's eyelids drooped, her breathing slowing to a gentle rise and fall. He stood, stretching his lanky frame, and crossed to Ellen, pulling her into a quick, rough hug. "Gotta swing by the mill tonight, extra shift. Boss says we're behind, and the overtime's too good to pass up." She smoothed his collar, her fingers lingering. "You work too damn hard, you know that? Be careful out there." "Always am," he said, kissing her cheek. "Back before the moon's high promise." He crouched by Lily, brushing a kiss across her forehead. "Sleep tight, sugar. I'll play your tune when I'm home." The Stillwater lumber mill hulkied on the edge of town, a beast of steel and timber squatting under a sky bruised with clouds. The night was cool, the air sharp with the scent of pine resin and diesel, the hum of machinery a low growl beneath the rustle of leaves. Hank clocked in, his boots thudding on the concrete floor, the Strat left safe at home but its riff still buzzing in his head. He'd been at the mill for years-long shifts feeding logs into the saws, hands steady despite the ache that crept into his joints. It wasn't glamour, but it kept the lights on, kept Lily in crayons and Ellen in flour. The crew was thin that night, just a handful of guys scattered across the floor, their voices swallowed by the roar of the bandsaws. Hank manned his station, feeding planks into the beast, the blade screaming as it chewed through wood. He was halfway through a stack when it happened to hitch, a groan, something wrong in the machine's guts. "Hey, hold up!" he yelled, waving at the operator, but the noise drowned him out. The saw bucked, a sickening screech splitting the air, and then the chain snapped, metal and timber flying like shrapnel. Hank dove, instincts kicking in, but he wasn't fast enough. A slab of oak jagged, heavy slammed into his skull, a white-hot burst of pain exploding behind his eyes. The world spun, a kaleidoscope of sparks and shadow, the mill's roar fading to a distant hum. He hit the floor hard, blood pooling warm against the cold concrete, the riff of Lily's tune flickering in his mind like a dying ember. Then darkness swallowed him whole, thick and merciless. Back at the house, Ellen was elbow-deep in dishes, the pumpkin bread cooling on the counter. It sent a ghost of comfort in the quiet. The clock ticked past midnight, each second stretching longer than the last, a knot twisting in her gut. Hank was late, sometimes mill breakdowns, a beer with the boys, but he de-promised. She dried her hands, peering out the window at the empty driveway, the streetlights casting lonely pools of yellow. The phone sat silent, a taunt she couldn't ignore. "Simon, Hank," she muttered, pacing to the living room where Lily slept, curled under the throw like a kitten. The fire had dwindled to glowing coals, the room dim and still. Ellen grabbed the phone, dialing his cell straight to a dead buzz. "Hey, it's me," she said, voice tight against the beep. "Where you at, hon? Call me, please." The hours crawled, the night deepening into a chill that seeped through the walls. Lily stirred, blinking up from the rug. "Mama?" she mumbled, rubbing her eyes. "Where's Daddy?" "Yes, running late." "Baby," Ellen said, forcing a smile that felt like a lie. "Go back to sleep, he'll be here soon." But he wasn't. Dawn crept in, gray and heavy, when the phone finally shrilled. Ellen snatched it, heart hammering. "Hank? Mrs. Sullivan?" The voice was clipped, official a cop. "This is Deputy Rawls, Stillwater PD. There's been an accident at the mill." Her knees buckled, her grip whitening on the counter. "What? Is he okay? Where is he?" There was a machine failure," Rawls said, steady but hollow. "A beam hit your husband, head trauma, bad. He was awake when the medics got him, but he's gone now. Walked outta the hospital before anyone could stop him. We're looking, but he's in the wind." "Gone?" she snapped, voice rising. "What do you mean, gone? He's hurt, you're saying he just walked off?" "We're trying to find him," Rawls said, useless as a broken clock. "Could be disoriented head injuries do that. We'll keep you posted." The line clicked dead, and Ellen sank to the floor, pulling Lily close as the girl toddled over, tugging her apron. "Mama? Daddy coming home?" "Yeah. Baby," Ellen whispered, her voice fracturing into shards. "He's just taking a detour tonight." Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows, carrying away the last echoes of Hank Sullivan's riff and any trace of where he'd vanished to. The night stretched into a void, and in that little house on the edge of Stillwater, two souls clung to a hope that felt thinner than the dawn. The hospital in Tulsa loomed like a cold fortress against a slate-gray sky, its corridors steeped in the sharp sting of antiseptic and the murmur of lives teetering on the edge. The room where Hank Sullivan woke was a sterile cage, white walls glaring under flickering fluorescence, a single window framing a world he couldn't grasp, and machines chirping a relentless rhythm beside his bed. His head throbbed, a dull hammer pounding behind his eyes, and his body felt like it'd been dragged through a grinder, ribs aching, hands scraped raw. The air tasted metallic, tinged with the ghost of blood that crusted his temple, where a jagged gash had been stitched shut. Outside, the wind howled, a mournful wail that rattled the glass, but inside, time hung heavy, a fog as thick as the one clouding his mind. He blinked awake, slow and groggy, the world swimming into focus. A nurse in crisp blue scrubs hovered over him, her face a blur of sharp angles and tired eyes, her voice cutting through the haze like a blade. "Hey there, you're back with us," she said, her tone clipped but soft around the edges. "You've been out a spell, took a hell of a knock. Can you tell me your name, hon?" Hank's mouth was dry as dust, his tongue a clumsy stranger as he tried to speak. His voice rasped, a stranger-esque growl, and he frowned, digging through the emptiness in his skull. Nothing came, no name, no anchor, just a void where something should be been. "I don't know," he croaked, panic flickering like a spark in his chest. Can't remember." The nurse's brow creased, her pen hovering over a clipboard. "No ID on you when they hauled you in," she said, half to herself. "Mill folks said you were one of theirs. Hank something, maybe. That strike a chord?" "Hank," he echoed, tasting the word like a bitter pill. It rolled around, heavy but hollow, a shape without a story. "Maybe. I don't there's just this sound." He closed his eyes, and there it was, a riff, electric and fierce, clawing its way through the dark. His fingers twitched, muscle memory kicking in, tracing invisible strings. It was Lily's tune, a jagged burst of rock blues that pulsed in his veins. The only thing he could hold on to. A sound? A doctor shuffled in, a lanky figure with wire-rimmed glasses and a clipboard tucked under his arm. His voice was dry as the plains, clinical but curious. "What kind of sound we talking about?" Hank's hands moved, mimicking the strum. "Like a guitar," he said, the riff humming in his throat, a lifeline he couldn't explain. "It's all I've got, keeps playing over and over." The doctor scratched his chin, exchanging a glance with the nurse. "Head trauma," he muttered, low enough to think Hank wouldn't hear. "Amnesia s par for the course. With a hit like that could clear up, could stick. We'll see." He turned back, louder now. "You got family we can ring? Someone who know you?" Hank's chest tightened, an ache blooming where a name, a face, should be lived. "I don't know," he said, voice splintering. "Feels like there's something missing, but I can't grab it." They kept him a while, days blurring into a haze of tests and hushed voices. His skull stitched and his ribs taped, the riff looping endless in his mind. The cops swung by, a burly guy with a badge and a frown, scribbling in a notepad. "Mill says you're Hank Sullivan," he grunted. "Wife's been calling every hospital from here to Texas. You sure you don't remember her?" "Kid, too, little girl, 'bout 6. A little girl." The words punched through the fog, a flicker of warmth, a giggle, maybe, soft as wind chimes. But it slipped away, a shadow on water, leaving him grasping at nothing. "I don't know he said, voice flat, staring at the cracked ceiling. "Just the riff, that's all I've got." The cop sighed, snapping his notepad shut. "Well, if you're him, they're waitin'. We'll keep an eye out." He left, boots echoing down the hall, and Hank was alone again, the machines his only company. When they cut him loose, it was with a paper sack of hand-me-downs, jeans stiff with someone else's wear, a flannel shirt faded to gray, boots scuffed at the toes. No wallet, no keys, just a crumpled bus ticket and a shrug from the orderly. "Try the shelters," the guy said, tossing him a list of numbers scratched on a napkin. "Good luck, Hank, or whoever you are." He stumbled out into Tulsa's sprawl, the wind biting through the thin flannel, the city a snarl of horns and concrete that swallowed him whole. His head still ached, a dull pulse that matched the riff rattling in his skull, but he had nowhere to go, no thread to follow. A trucker with a grizzled beard and a rig full of lumber gave him a lift east, no questions asked, dropping him in Nashville under a sky heavy with dusk. The streets there thrummed with life, neon signs buzzing, boots clacking on sidewalks, the air thick with the twang of bar music and the sour bite of spilled beer. Hank wandered, a ghost in the crowd, the riff his only compass. He slept that first night under a bridge, the Tennessee River lapping cold against the pilings, the concrete hard against his back. Hunger gnawed at him, a sharp twist in his gut, but he didn't know where to start, didn't know who he was without the sound in his head. Days later, footsore and hollow, he stumbled across a pawn shop on Broadway, its window a jumble of junk and faded dreams. There it was, a Fender Stratocaster, its red finish scratched to hell, strings dulled with rust, leaning against a stack of amps like it'd been waiting for him. He didn't have a dime, but the guy behind the counter, a wiry fellow with a ponytail and a cigarette dangling, watched him linger. "You play?" the guy asked, blowing a ring of smoke. "Yeah," Hank said, the word slipping out before he knew it was true. "I think so." "Prove it," Ponytail said, jerking his chin at the guitar. "I'm sellin' to no poser." Hank lifted it, the weight familiar as a lost limb, and plugged it into a dusty amp. His fingers found the strings, clumsy at first, then sure, and Lily's tune roared out sharp, electric, a storm breaking loose. The shop trembled, the riff bouncing off the walls, raw and alive. Ponytail's jaw dropped, smoke curling forgotten from his lips. "Damn, man," he said, stubbing out the cigarette. "Take it, $20. You've got soul in them hands." Hank scraped the cash from coins he begged on the street. The guitar his now, a piece of himself reclaimed. He found a corner near Printer's Alley that night, the amp humming beside him, and let the riff loose again. The notes cut through the city's din. A jagged cry that turned heads, some tossed quarters, some sneered, most just passed by. But it was enough. A kid in a hoodie, maybe 10, paused, his sneakers scuffed and his eyes bright. "That's badass, mister," he said, flipping $1 into the dirt. "Sounds like something my pops play." Hank's throat tightened, that ache flaring like a bruise he couldn't place. "Thanks, kid," he rasped, fingers faltering for a beat. "Glad you think so." The boy grinned and bolted, swallowed by the neon glow, and Hank played on, the riff his tether to a past he couldn't name. Night fell, the cold creeping up from the pavement, and he curled under a tarp scavenged from a dumpster, the Strat clutched tight. The city pulsed around him, drunk laughter, distant sirens. The river's low song, but he was alone with the sound. A lifeline he didn't understand. It was all he had, this electric echo, a shard of something broken he couldn't piece together. Somewhere, deep in the marrow of his bones, he felt it calling to who, to what, he didn't know. But he'd keep playing, keep chasing it, till it led him out of the dark. Dewey Day La Chuang 4, echoes on the streets, Duok Viet Bang Tiang on my Voi Du Dai Koang 2502, Do a Tren Don Y De Thong Not, Twasu Dung Tun Gufong Po, Sang Tao, Kok Voi Mo Tip Gok, Nan Man Guitar Dian Va Goi Gon Han Trin Lang Tang Duong Pho Qua Hank Mot Kach Nan Gon, Tong Quan, Juven Fong Gon Gue Doi Song Mai, Va Ket Tuk Bang Loi Kugoi Tuong Tak Kio Leo. Nashville wore its nights like a tattered coat, patched with neon and shadow. The air a stew of spilled whiskey, cigarette smoke, and the faint musk of rain-soaked asphalt. The city thrummed a restless beast of barroom twang and street corner hustle, and Hank Sullivan drifted through it, a wraith stitched together by the riff in his head and the weight of the Fender Stratocaster slung across his back. The seasons blurred into a hazy reel after he stumbled into town, spring's damp whispers giving way to summer's swelter, then autumn's bite and winter's teeth. Time didn't mean much when you had nowhere to be, no name to claim beyond the one they pinned on him, and nothing but a sound to keep the dark at bay. He carved out a life, if you could call it that, in the city's underbelly, a patchwork of survival stitched with grit and stubbornness. His boots, scuffed to the bone, knew every alley from Printer's Alley to the riverfront, every stoop where the wind didn't claw too hard. The leather jacket he started with hung looser now, patched with duct tape where the seams gave up, its lining thin against the chill. His jeans were a map of stains, grease, dirt, the occasional splash of blood from a busted lip, and his hair, once chestnut, was a wild tangle streaked with silver, spilling over a face hardened by sun and sorrow. But the Strat, his red, battered savior, stayed true, its strings dulled but alive, the amp a constant hum at his side. Hank didn't live day by day so much as riff by riff. Lily's tune was his pulse, a rock blues snarl he'd play on any corner that have him under the flicker of busted streetlights, beside the rumble of bridges, in the glow of bar signs promising cheap beer and cheaper dreams. The notes tore through the city's din, sharp and electric, a jagged hymn that didn't ask for much, just enough coins to keep hunger at bay. Some folks tossed quarters or crumpled bills into the dented coffee can at his feet, their boots pausing mid-stride. Others sneered, spitting curses like "Shut that racket up, bum," or "Get a damn job." He took it all, the kindness, the venom, because the riff didn't care. It was his, the only piece of himself he could hold, even if he didn't know where it come from. The streets taught him quick. He learned the rhythm of the throwaways, where the diner on 2nd Avenue dumped its day-old biscuits, where the bar on Demonbrunn left half-drunk beers by the trash if you hit it right after last call. Sleep was a thief's bargain, snatched in fits under tarps or cardboard, tucked against brick walls that radiated the day's heat or bit with frost. He'd wake to the clatter of bottles or the shuffle of other lost souls. His hands curled around the Strat like it was kin. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep the cold from sinking too deep, enough to keep the riff alive. Trouble found him now and then, a shadow that didn't let go. He'd been jumped more times than he cared to count, drunks looking for a fight, punks with too much swagger and not enough sense. Once, under the Jefferson Street Bridge, a wiry bastard with a switchblade tried to snatch the guitar, his breath sour with rotgut. "Gimme that piece o' junk," He'd slurred, steel glinting in the dark. Hank's knuckles still ached from the punch he'd thrown. The guy's nose crunching under his fist, blood spattering the concrete. He'd kept the Strat, but the bruises lingered purple blooms on his ribs, a split lip that stung when he drank. Another time, a pack of kids barely old enough to shave kicked him awake in an alley, laughing as they ran off with his can of coins. He didn't chase them. Wasn't he worth it? The riff was what mattered. He wasn't alone out there, not really. The streets had their own tribe, ragged figures who shared the margins, their eyes hollow but sharp. There was Earl, a grizzled vet with a limp and a laugh like gravel, who'd swap stories for a swig of whatever Hank scrounged. "That axe o' yours," Earl said once, hunched over a fire in a rusted barrel. "It's gold, man. Keep it screamin', it's something real in this shithole." Then there was Dot, a wiry woman with a smokerous rasp and a knack for finding warm spots, who'd gnawed along to the riff like it was her own. "Sounds like home," she'd mutter, her voice a whisper against the wind. They didn't ask much, didn't give much, but they were their phantoms bound by the same frayed thread. The riff was his compass, his confession, his question to a world that didn't answer. He'd play till his fingers bled, the Strat-esque growl cutting through the damp of a rainy dawn or the brittle chill of a winter dusk. Sometimes it drew a crowd, folks heading to the bars, their boots slowing, eyes lingering. A woman in a long coat once stopped, her face etched with weariness, and dropped a $5 into the can. "That's haunting," she said, voice soft as a sigh. "Reminds me of my boy, used to love that kind of sound." Hank's chest clenched, a pang he couldn't name, and he nodded, the riff faltering for a breath. "Thanks," he rasped, watching her fade into the throng, her words a splinter under his skin. Kids were the best or the worst, depending. They decluster sometimes, wide-eyed and fearless, sneakers scuffing the pavement. "Play it again, mister." One shout, a scrappy girl with braids and a gap-toothed grin, tossing a nickel like it was treasure. He'd oblige, cranking the amp till the riff roared, their laughter a bright counterpoint to the city's growl. It lit something in him, a flicker of warmth, a ghost of a giggle he couldn't place. But it never lasted. They'd scatter, and he'd be alone again, the echo of their voices swallowed by the night. He didn't know how long he'd been out there, years, maybe, a blur of faces and seasons, the riff his only constant. The streets hardened him, whittled him down to bone and will, but they didn't break him. He'd sit under the sodium glow of a busted lamp, the Strat cradled close, and let Lily's tune loose a cry into the void, a plea he didn't understand. "Why's this all I've got?" He'd mutter to the dark, fingers tracing the strings, the question gnawing at him like a stray dog with a bone. "Who's it for?" No answer came, just the hum of the amp and the distant wail of a train slicing through the night. One evening, as a drizzle painted the streets in silver, he leaned against a brick wall off Lower Broad, the riff spilling out like a river breaking its banks. A man paused, tall, lean, in a faded jacket, watching from the curb, hands stuffed in his pockets. "You've got soul in that thing," he called, voice cutting through the patter. "Sounds like it's trying to find somebody." Hank's fingers stilled, the amp buzzing soft. "Maybe," he said, voice rough as the pavement. "Don't know who, though." The guy nodded, tossing a couple bucks into the can. "Keep it up, man. Somebody's listenin'." He walked off, swallowed by the mist, and Hank stared after him. The riff picking up again, slower, heavier, a weight he couldn't shake. He curled up that night under a tarp by the river, the Strat tucked against his chest, the cold seeping through the cracks. The city's pulse thrummed around him, cars rumbling, voices fading, The water's low song, but he was adrift, a man unmoored. The riff looped in his head, a tether to something lost, a beacon he couldn't see. I ain't quit tin, he whispered into the dark, breath fogging the air. Somebody out there gotta be. He didn't know who, didn't know why, but he'd play till the strings snapped or the world gave him back what it'd taken. For now, it was enough him, the strat, and the echo of a tune that refused to die. Hey why all? If Hank's Street Saga got you caught up, don't let it slip, hit that subscribe button and ride along. Toss us a comment. Who's that riff reaching out to in the dark? We're Hank Aaron for your best guesses, let us piece this puzzle together. Morris rollin' out soon, don't miss it. Winter gripped Nashville with a vengeance. A beast of ice and wind that sank its claws into every corner of the city. The streets glistened under a shroud of frost, the neon signs dulled by a sky heavy with snow, and the air bit hard sharp with the tang of frozen asphalt and the faint whiff of smoke curling from makeshift fires. Beneath the I-40 overpass, where the concrete loomed like a bruised cathedral, Hank Sullivan carved out a sliver of shelter, a tarp strung taut against a pillar, his breath a fleeting cloud in the gloom. The cold wasn't just weather out here, it was a living thing, gnawing at his bones, seeping through the patched leather of his jacket and the threadbare denim clinging to his legs. But the Fender Stratocaster stayed close, its chipped red body pressed against his chest, the amp humming faint beside him, a lifeline in the storm. He'd been out here 2 long years, lost to the blur of streets and shadows, the riff of Lily's tune his only tether. His hands, once steady, were gnarled now, knuckles swollen from frost and fights, fingers stiff as they traced the strings. The amp's buzz was weaker these days, its battery fading, but he coaxed it to life, the riff spilling out a jagged rock blues growl that cut through the wind's howl. The notes danced off the overpass, sharp and wild, a defiance against the night's weight. He played till his breath stung, till the cold numbed the ache in his ribs, the sound of fire he stoked against the dark. Footsteps crunched through the snow, a staccato rhythm that snapped him alert. He didn't look up at first, folks passed through all the time, their boots kicking up slush, their eyes sliding past, but these stopped too close, a shadow falling heavy across his tarp. 3 figures loomed, their breath steaming in the frigid air, silhouettes jagged against the sodium glow. Kids barely out of high school, bundled in hoodies and cheap coats, reeking of cheap beer and cheaper weed. The tallest one, a lanky punk with a buzz cut and a sneer, swayed on his feet, a bottle dangling from his hand. Well, ain't this a sight, he slurred, kicking at the snow near Hank's boots. Old man's throwing a damn concert down here. Hank's gut tightened, but he kept his fingers moving, the riff steady. Just playin', he said, voice low and rough, gravel scraped raw by the years. Ain't both there and nobody. Playin', another one mocked a squat kid with a patchy beard, his laugh a high, mean cackle. That noise sounds like a cat getting skinned. What's it even for, huh? Leave him, the third muttered, shifting uneasy, a phone glowing in his hand recording. Probably, the little bastard. But he didn't step in, just hovered like a vulture waiting for scraps. Buzz Cut grinned, a crooked slash of teeth, and nudged the amp with his toe, the buzz stuttering. I want to hear something good, he said, voice thick with menace. See mon? Geezer play or pay. Hank's jaw clenched, but he kept the riff rolling, slower now, hoping they'd tire and stumble off. The notes growled low, a storm brewing in their depths, but Buzz Cut wasn't done. He lunged, snatching at the strat. Gimme that junk, let us see if it's worth a damn. No, Hank barked, yanking it back, the riff cutting off as the amp whined. His voice was steel, fear buried deep. You ain't talking this. Walk away. Buzz Cut's grin vanished, eyes narrowing to slits. What do you say, you piece o' trash? He shoved Hank hard, the tarp snapping loose as Hank sprawled against the pillar, the strat clanging on the concrete. Pain flared his shoulder, screaming, his breath stolen, but he scrambled, curling around the guitar like a shield. The first kick landed square in his ribs, a dull thud that cracked the air. Then a fist slammed his jaw, blood bursting hot and bitter in his mouth, a boot catching his side with a sickening crunch. Fucking loser, patchy beard spat, stomping down again, the snow staining red where Hank's lips split. The third kid laughed, shaky and shrill, the phone steady in his grip. Hank grunted, the world blurring snow and shadow, pain and static, but he held the strat, taking the blows, the riff looping silent in his skull. They kept at it, a whirlwind of fists and curses, till Buzzcut staggered back, panting, wiping sweat from his brow. "Ain't worth the hassle," he muttered, spitting into the slush. "Let us roll." They lurched off, their laughter swallowed by the storm, leaving Hank crumpled against the pillar, blood dripping onto the snow in stark, crimson blooms. His ribs burned, each breath a knife, and his hands shook as they clutched the guitar. Its strings intact, but the body scuffed deeper. The tarp flapped useless above him, snow piling around his legs, and the cold sank in, a tide pulling him under. His eyes fluttered shut, the riff fading to a whisper, and then he heard it, a voice, small and bright, cutting through the haze. "Keep playin', Daddy," it said, soft as a breeze, a giggle trailing like sunlight. He didn't know where it came from, a dream, a ghost, but it lit a spark in his chest, fierce and unyielding. His eyes snapped open, the storm roaring back into focus, and he dragged himself up, snow crunching under his palms, blood smearing his knuckles. The cold clawed harder, but he didn't care. He grabbed the strat, fingers trembling, and stood, leaning heavy against the pillar. "I'm still here," he roared into the blizzard, voice raw and ragged, tearing through the wind. "You hear me? I'm still here for you, whoever you are." The words echoed, swallowed by the night, but they burned in him, a wildfire against the ice. He wasn't done, not yet, not while that riff still thrummed in his blood. He sank back, breath heaving, and fumbled with the amp, its buzz weak but alive. The riff spilled out again, shaky at first, then strong, a howl of defiance, a promise he'd keep till it broke him or brought him home. Snow swirled thicker, the overpass groaning above, and he played till his fingers bled, the sound a beacon in the chaos. A shadow moved through the white, a figure, steady against the storm. Hank tensed, ready for more, but it was just a guy, tall, broad, in a beat-up jacket, 2 steaming cups in his hands. He stopped a few feet off, his face half lit by the glow filtering through the snow, eyes warm but wary. "Christ, man," he said, voice cutting through the riff's fade. "You look like you've been through a meat grinder. What the hell happened?" Hank wiped blood from his chin, the riff dying as he shrugged. "Kids," he muttered, voice hoarse. "Didn't take to my plan." The guy crouched, setting a cup in the snow beside Hank, steam curling up like a lifeline. "Coffee hot and black," he said, a grin tugging his lips. "Name's Caleb. Saw layin' into you from up the road, figured you could use a thaw. You making music out here in this mess?" "Yeah," Hank said, wrapping numb fingers around the cup, the heat a jolt against the cold. "Keeps me going." Caleb sipped his own, nodding slow. "Heard it down the block, that riff's got teeth. You ought to be somewhere warm, not freezing your ass off." Hank snorted, a dry laugh that stung his ribs. "Ain't got a somewhere to go to." Caleb's gaze lingered, steady but not pushy. "There's a spot a couple blocks over, soup joint, open late. Got hot grub and a dry floor. Come with me, man, get out of this hell." Hank's pride bristled, a reflex honed by years alone. But the coffee was good, and Caleb's voice carried no pity, just a hand outstretched. The riff still buzzed in his head, stronger now, a spark reignited. "All right," he rasped, hauling himself up, the strat slung over his shoulder. "Just for tonight." Caleb clapped him on the back, gentle, mindful of the bruises, and led the way, snow crunching underfoot. "Bring that guitar," he said, grinning. "Might warm more than just you in there." Hank followed, the storm howling at his back, the riff a steady pulse in his veins. The night had nearly broken him, but that spark, the voice, the sound kept him standing. He didn't know where it lead, but he chase it, play it, till it burned through the dark. The soup kitchen on Nashville's east side wasn't much to look at, a squat, brick box hunkered between a shuttered pawn shop and a vacant lot strewn with broken bottles. But inside, it was a sanctuary stitched from warmth and grit, a refuge where the air hummed with the clatter of tin trays and the low murmur of voices chasing away the cold. The scent hit Hank Sullivan like a memory. He couldn't tea place rich with simmering stew, yeasty bread fresh from the oven, and a faint whiff of coffee brewing strong. The walls were a patchwork of peeling paint and faded flyers, the floor scuffed linoleum that creaked underfoot, and the windows steamed with the breath of folks who found a sliver of respite. It wasn't home, but it was close enough to feel the difference. Hank shuffled in behind Caleb that first night, his boots leaving wet smears on the floor, the Fender Stratocaster slung over his shoulder like a battered shield. His ribs still ached from the beating under the overpass, his jaw tender where blood had crusted, but the coffee Caleb had handed him burned hot in his hands, thawing the chill that settled deep. The room buzzed with life, tables crowded with figures in mismatched coats, heads bent over bowls, spoons scraping a rhythm against metal. Caleb nodded toward a corner spot. "Park it there," he said, his jacket unzipped to show a faded Titan's tee. "I'll grab us some chow." Hank eased onto a bench, the wood groaning under him, his bruised shoulder brushing the wall with a wince. The faces around him were a gallery of where eyes hollowed by too many nights out, hands trembling around mugs, stories etched in every line. An old guy with a beard like steel will slurped broth across the way, his coat patched with duct tape. A woman with a knit cap rocked a kid on her knee, humming soft under the din. They didn't look at Hank. Didn't need to out there, you kept your head down in here, you just ate and breathed. Caleb slid back with 2 trays bowls steaming with beefy stew, thick with carrots and potatoes, and a stack of rolls still warm from the oven. "Dig in, man," he said, dropping onto the bench opposite. "I'm fancy, but it'll glue your bones back together." Hank didn't argue. He tore into a roll, the crust flaking under his fingers, and spooned up the stew, the heat flooding his mouth with a salt and earth goodness he hadn't tasted in years. "Thanks," he muttered, voice rough as the grain of the table. "Been a minute since I had something this solid." Caleb grinned, leaning back with his own bowl. "Yeah, they do right by folks here. Church crew runs it, volunteers mostly. I swing by when I'm haulin' deliveries. Beats shiverin' out there." "Huh?" Hank nodded, swallowing hard. "You do this a lot? Pullin' strays outta the cold?" "When I can," Caleb said, shrugging. "Day job pays the bills, but this place, it's where the real stuff happens. You ever think about sticking somewhere like this?" Hank's spoon paused, broth dripping back into the bowl. "I'm thought past keepin' my head above water," he said, eyes on the steam curling up. "Been driftin' too long, I reckon." Caleb studied him, his grin softening to something steadier. "That riff I heard out there, it's got soul, man. Don't let it waste away in the snow." Hank's throat tightened, the riff Lily's tune buzzing in his skull like a restless ghost. "It's all I've got," he said, quiet as the flicker of the overhead lights. "Feels like it's mine, even if I don't know why." They ate in silence after that, the warmth sinking into Hank's marrow, easing the edges of a night that nearly snapped him. When the bowls were scraped clean, Caleb stretched, wiping his hands on his jeans. "They've got cots upstairs if you want to crash. No fuss, no forms. Beats the pavement." Hank's pride bristled, a reflex from years of scraping by, but the thought of a rail bed, even a creaky one, tugged hard. "All right," he rasped, voice low. "Just tonight." That night stretched into weeks, then months, then years, a slow unraveling of time that wove him into the shelterless rhythm. He didn't just crash, he stayed, his hands finding work in the chaos, scrubbing pots in the kitchen, hauling crates of canned goods, sweeping floors gritty with the city's leavings. It wasn't much, but it was something, a tether beyond the streets. The regulars warmed to him, slow and wary, like stray dogs sniffing a newcomer. Earl was there, the vet from his bridge days, his limp heavier but his laugh still sharp. "You're a stubborn son of a gun, Hank," he'd say, clapping his shoulder. "Good to have you round." Then there was Dot, her smoker's rasp a constant in the dining hall, her eyes bright when she wasn't nodding off over coffee. "You're looking less like roadkill," she'd tease, shoving a roll his way. Keep that axe handy, it's a damn sight better than silence. Caleb was the anchor, always there with a mug of black or a quick jab, never prying too deep. One evening, as the kitchen quieted after supper, he caught Hank fiddling with the Strat in a back corner, the amp humming low. The room was still pot stacked, mop bucket sloshing in the hall, and the riff spilled out, a gritty growl that bounced off the brick. Hell, man, Caleb said, leaning against a counter, arms crossed. You play like you're bleeding it out. Ever thought about letting these folks hear it? Hank's fingers stilled, the riff fading to a buzz. I'm too much to hear when you don't know what it means, he said, voice rough. Just this tune been with me since I woke up busted. Don't know where it's from. Caleb tilted his head, thoughtful. Maybe it's telling you something. Play it out there, they could use a spark. The idea took root, a seed in cracked earth. A week later, on a night thick with damp chill, Hank hauled the Strat to the dining hall after the trays were cleared. The tables were still full, folks lingering over coffee dregs and stale cookies, their coats draped over chairs. He sat up by the heater, the amp crackling to life, nerves jangling like loose strings. Lily's tune roared out sharp, electric. A storm breaking loose and the room went still. Earl set his mug down. Das chatter cut off mid-word. Even the kid in the knit cap froze on her mama's lap. The riff filled the space, raw and fierce. A sound that didn't ask permission, just took root. When it faded, the silence was heavy, then cracked with a clap Earl's hands. Then a wave rolling through the crowd. Give us another. Dot hollered, her rasp thick with something soft. Something to feel, Hank. He did bits of blues he didn't know he knew. Riffs that poured from some buried well, always circling back to Lily's tune. It became a ritual nights when he'd play, folks gathering like moths to a flame, their faces softening, some wet with tears they didn't hide. The sound stitched them together, a thread through the fray, and for once, Hank didn't feel like a ghost. Caleb watched it unfold, a quiet pride in his nod. Told ya, he said one night, tossing Hank a cookie from the kitchen. You're giving 'em something they forgot they needed. Hank chewed slow, the riff still humming in his hands. Hope, maybe, he said half to himself. Feels good, I guess. It's more than hope, Caleb said, leaning forward, elbows on the table. It's like you're calling out to them, to whoever that tune's for. Don't stop, man. The years ticked by a blur of faces and seasons, the shelter a steady pulse in Hank's drift. He fixed the Strat with strings Caleb scrounged, kept it humming, kept playing. Earl taught him poker with a deck missing half the cards. Dot knitted him a scarf from yarn scraps ugly as sin but warm, and Caleb was there, a rock in the storm. The world outside shifted, new faces came. Old ones faded, but in here, Hank found a corner, not home exactly, but a stage where he wasn't invisible. He didn't know who he'd been, didn't know what he'd lost, but this was a start. One night, after a set that left the room buzzing, Caleb sat with him, two chipped mugs steaming between them. You ever wonder who that riff's reaching for? He asked, voice low over the heater's hum. Hank stared into the coffee, the tune looping in his head. Every damn night, he said, rough and quiet. Feels like they're out there waiting, just don't know how to get to 'em. Caleb nodded, sipping slow. Maybe they come to you. Keep playing, Hank, that sound's got a pull. Hank didn't answer, just lifted the Strat and let the riff roll low, steady, a spark in the shelterous glow. He didn't know where it'd take him, but for the first time in years, he felt it might lead somewhere worth going. The spring air in Stillwater, Oklahoma, carried a whisper of renewal, a soft breath that rustled the cottonwoods and stirred the scent of damp earth and budding wildflowers. Inside the Sullivan house, the afternoon light spilled through lace curtains, gilding the hardwood in a warm haze. Lily Sullivan stood in her old bedroom, a sanctuary unchanged by time, same creaky bed with its quilt patched from her grandma's scraps, same corkboard pinned with faded photos and a ticket stub from her first rodeo. She smoothed the denim of her wedding dress against the mirror, its lace trim catching the glow, a simple beauty that felt like her. Her blonde hair hung loose, a cascade of sunlight, and her green eyes shimmered with a cocktail of nerves and longing. her fingers brushing the locket at her throat, the silver relic holding her daddiest grin. Ellen bustled in from the kitchen, her apron streaked with flour, a tray of cornbread muffins balanced in her hands. She'd been a whirlwind all day kneading dough, stirring gravy, anything to keep her hands busy and her heart steady. "You sure I can't fuss with that hair tonight?" she asked, setting the tray on the dresser, her voice a warm thread laced with a tremble. "Want to make sure you're sparklin' tomorrow, honey?" Lily turned, a smile tugging her lips. "I'm good, Mama. Caleb's sister got it covered in the mornin'. You've already done plenty." Ellen nodded, brushing her hands on her jeans, her auburn hair slipping from its bun. "Just want it perfect your big day and all." Her gaze snagged on the locket, and her smile softened, tinged with ache. "He'd be bustin' with pride. Lil, you know that, don't ya?" Lily's throat tightened, her fingers tracing the silver. "Yeah," she said, voice soft as a sigh. "Always pictured him here playin' that guitar, twirlin' me round." "Silly, huh?" "Ain't he silly," Ellen said, stepping close to wrap her in a hug, flour dusting Lily's shoulder. "I see him too, every time I close my eyes." They lingered there, the hum of the fridge downstairs a quiet underscore, until Lily's phone buzzed on the bed. She grabbed it, brow furrowing at Caleb's name. "Hey babe," she answered, voice lifting. "What's up?" "Hey Lil." Caleb's voice crackled through, rushed and wind whipped. He was outside somewhere. "Got a snag. The band's out some last-minute gig sidelined em. They ain't comin'." Her stomach dropped, and she sank onto the quilt. "You're kiddin'. Caleb, what we gonna do? That was our dance everything." "I know, darlin'," he said, steady but urgent. "I'm on it, got a plan brewin'. Don't you fret, alright? Trust me." She sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "'Kay. But it better be good, Reed. It'll be magic," he said, a grin sneaking into his tone. "Love ya. See ya tomorrow." "Love you too," she muttered, hanging up. Ellen raised an eyebrow and Lily waved a hand. "Band SA no show. Caleb's got some fix up his sleeve, Lord knows what." Ellen chuckled, patting her knee. "That boy wrestle a tornado for you. He'll make it right." Across state lines in Nashville, Caleb Reed was already chasing that fix. He rolled into town the night before a quick detour for a buddy's bachelor send-off. Just beers and darts at a dive-off Music Row. The band's cancellation had hit like a gut punch an hour ago, and he stepped outside to breathe, the spring breeze tugging at his jacket as he paced the sidewalk. The street pulsed with Saturday night honky-tonks spilling twang, boots clacking, neon painting the dark in garish streaks. He needed music for Lily's day, something real, something that make her eyes light up like they did when she talked about her daddy's guitar. Playlist wouldn't do. He needed soul. That when it hit him, a sound slicing through the clamor, raw and electric. A riff that grabbed him by the chest and wouldn't let go. He turned down a side street, boots crunching over gravel, and there it was, Hank Sullivan, though Caleb didn't know it yet. The man sat on a crate by a flickering street lamp, his Stratocaster cradled close, fingers dancing over the strings with a ferocity that belied his ragged frame. His leather jacket hung like a second skin, patched and worn, his silver-streaked hair wild under the glow, and the riff Lily's tune roared out, a rock blues beast that shook the air. Caleb stopped dead, breath catching, the sound a thunderbolt in the dusk. "Hot damn," he muttered, stepping closer. A few stragglers lingered, barflies and late-night wanderers, some tossing coins into a dented can, others swaying like the tune had roots in their bones. Caleb waited till the riff faded, the amp's buzz settling, then moved in as the small crowd thinned. "Man, that was unreal," he said, crouching to Hank's level. "What's your name?" Hank looked up, startled, his hands pausing on the strings. His eyes were deep-set, shadowed but piercing, a flicker of wariness in their hazel depths. "Hank," he rasped, voice rough as the gravel underfoot. "Just Hank." "Caleb," he said, offering a hand that Hank shook slow, cautious. "You play like that regular? 'Cause that's some fire I ain't heard in a while." Hank shrugged, a faint twitch at his lips. "When I can. Keeps the night off my back." Caleb's mind raced, gears clicking fast. "Look, this is outta left field, But I need a player for my weddin' tomorrow. Band bailed, and I think that riff s what the night s missin'. You up for it? Hank blinked, the words sinking in like stones in still water. A weddin', he echoed, tasting the idea, fingers tightening on the strat. Something stirred a pull, faint and deep, a tremor he couldn't name. Where at? Stillwater, Oklahoma, Caleb said, grin widening. Couple hours south. I'll drive ya, pay you good $100 plus grub and a warm spot to crash. What'd I say? Hank stared, the wind whistling through the street, tugging at his jacket. Wedding's music, something about it plucked a string in his chest. A note he didn't know he de-strung. He didn't know why it felt heavy, why it called. But he nodded, slow and sure. All right, he said, voice a low rumble. I'll play. Hell yeah. Caleb clapped his hands, standing tall. You just saved my hide, Hank. Meet me here tomorrow morning. 8 sharp, I'll roll up with the truck. Bring that guitar and that fire and we're set. Hank managed a nod, watching Caleb stride off into the night, his jacket vanishing around the corner. He sat there a spell, the can rattling with coins as the breeze kicked up, the strat humming faint in his lap. A weddin', he muttered, strumming Lily's tune soft and low, the riff threading through the dark. Felt right nuts, maybe, but right like a road opening up he hadn't seen before. He didn't know what waited at the end. Didn't know the weight of the miracle ahead, but something in his gut sang louder than the city's pulse. Back in Stillwater, Lily stepped onto the porch as the sun dipped below the horizon. The sky a tapestry of fire and dusk. The air brushed cool against her skin, the locket warm where it rested on her chest. She closed her eyes, fingers tapping the riff she'd grown up with. Lily's tune, a habit etched deep since she was a kid. Wherever you are, Daddy, she whispered, voice a thread in the wind. Hope you're watching tomorrow. In Nashville, Hank packed his crate, the strat slung over his shoulder as he shuffled toward a sheltered stoop for the night. The riff played in his head, a steady growl that matched the city's hum. 2 echoes reaching across miles and years they didn't know were shrinking. Tomorrow, the road would carry him maybe to nothing, maybe to everything. He didn't know yet, but he'd play. It's what he did, what he'd always done. A sound chasing a shadow he couldn't name. Hey y'all, if this road to Stillwater S got your heart racing, don't let it slip. Smack that subscribe button and roll with us. Hit the comments. What s pullin' Hank back to that wedding? We're craving your wildest vibes. Let us spin some guesses together. The next beat south droppin' soon. Keep close. The morning sun spilled over Stillwater, Oklahoma, like molten honey, threading through the blinds of the Sullivan house to paint the kitchen in a soft, golden haze. The air was thick with the scent of strong coffee brewing and cornbread muffins cooling on the counter, their edges crisp from Ellen's oven. The room hummed with a quiet that felt alive, pots clinking in the sink, the faint creak of floorboards underfoot, a stillness stitched with the weight of a miracle. Lily Sullivan, now Lily Reed, sat at the old oak table, her wedding denim traded for a pair of worn jeans and Caleb's oversized flannel, the sleeves rolled up to her elbows. Her blonde hair hung in a messy braid, and her green eyes, still rimmed with the echo of last night's tears, fixed on the man across from her, her daddy, Hank Sullivan, back from a void she'd thought eternal. Hank looked softer in the daylight, the harsh edges of the streets smoothed by the kitchen's glow. His leather jacket hung on a chair, patched and weary, revealing a faded gray shirt beneath, and his silver-streaked hair was tamed by a quick comb of his fingers. He cradled a chipped mug, steam curling up to meet his weathered face, hands steady now where they trembled under the wedding lights. The Fender Stratocaster leaned against the wall by the door, its chipped red body catching the sun, a silent witness to the night that rewoven their world. Ellen moved at the counter, flipping bacon on a skillet that hissed and popped, her apron streaked with flour, her auburn hair slipping from its knot, a dance to keep her hands from shaking. Lily reached across the table, her fingers finding Hank's, lacing tight like a knot she'd never untie. I keep waiting to wake up, she said, voice a fragile thread, thick with wonder. Last night, Daddy, I thought you were a ghost. Thought I'd blink and lose you again. Hank's throat bobbed, his hazel eyes glistening as he squeezed back, calluses rough against her skin. I'm pinchin' myself too, sugar, he said, his drawl a low rumble, raw with feeling. Woke up thinkin' it was a fever dream you grown. So damn beautiful, standin' there in that dress. You're real and I'm here. Lily's laugh broke soft. A sob tangled in it, and she swiped at her eyes with her sleeve. You're real too, that's what counts. I don't even know where to start what happened, where you've been. I just need to hear you, Daddy. Ellen slid a plate of bacon and muffins onto the table, the skillet's sizzle fading as she sank into a chair, her own mug trembling in her grip. Me too, she said, voice steady but thin, a wire stretched taut. Hank, we tore the world apart looking for you, hospitals, shelters, every back road I could drive. What took you away? Hank set his coffee down, his gaze dropping to the table, tracing the ochus grain like it held the map of his lost years. I'm too easy to string it together, he said, slow, like the words were thorns he had to pull free. That night at the mill it's a blur, but it broke me. Machine went haywire, wood came crashing down, cracked my skull good. Woke up in a hospital bed in Tulsa, busted up and blank. Didn't he know my name? Didn't he know you any of it? Just this riff. He tapped his temple, the ghost of Lily's tune flickering in his eyes, and Lily's breath caught, recognizing it, the sound that Dee roared from the Strat last night. Docs called it amnesia, he went on, voice rough as gravel. Said I Dee been out cold a while, found me bleedin' on the floor. No papers, nothin'. All I had was that tune, clawin' at me like it wouldn't he let go. Ellen's mug clattered against the table, her voice fracturing. We thought you were dead, Hank. The mill was a wreck, blood, splinters, and you were gone. I called every place I could think of, drove till the tank ran dry. Lily wouldn't he sleep without that riff, she de-hum it, sayin' you'd come back. I'm sorry, Hank said, his voice splintering as he reached for her hand, gripping tight. I didn't know, couldn't know. They cut me loose with a sack of clothes and a bus ticket, and I ended up in Nashville. Streets took me in and I just kept going. Played that riff every damn day, hoping it'd find something, even when I didn't know what. Lily wiped her eyes, fierce now. It found us, she said, voice trembling but iron strong. Last night you played it and I felt you, Daddy. I knew it was you. Hank's lips quivered, a tear slipping free to carve a line down his cheek. When you ran up, when I saw your face, heard your voice, it all came rushing back. You, Ellen, this house, every note I ever played for you. Like a dam bustin' wide open. The back door creaked, and Caleb stepped in, his boots muddy from the yard, a whiff of grass clinging to his jacket. He'd been out tending the fence, a quiet excuse to give them space, but his brown eyes softened at the sight. Mornin', why all, he said, hanging his hat on the hook. Smells like a feast in here, Ellen. Sit, she said, shoving a plate his way, a smile breaking through her tears. Your kin now, eat up. Caleb slid beside Lily, his arm looping around her shoulders, pressing a kiss to her temple. How you holdin', darlin'? He murmured, voice a low bomb. Better than I ever dreamed, she said, leaning into him, her hand still locked with Hank's. Yes, back, Caleb, you brought him back. Caleb's gaze shifted to Hank, a mix of awe and humility flickering there. I didn't know, man, he said, voice thick. Caught your riff on that Nashville street, knew it'd light up the night. Had no clue it'd light up everything. Hank reached across, clapping Caleb's shoulder, his grip firm and grateful. You did more than that, son, he said, eyes shining. You strung me back to my girls. I played that tune every night, prayin' it'd reach 'em, and you made it sing. Thank you. Caleb swallowed hard, his hand squeezing Lily's beneath the table. She's my North Star, he said, simple and sure. Now she's got her Shernine again, that's all I wanted. Ellen sniffled, dabbing her face with a napkin. You're stuck with this crazy bunch now, Caleb, she said, a laugh bubbling through the ache. No backing out. Wouldn't he dream it, he said, grinning as he snagged a muffin, breaking it open to let steam curl up. They ate then, the clink of forks and the crunch of cornbread filling the quiet, a meal that wasn't perfect, wasn't whole yet, but was theirs. Hank watched Lily and Ellen, drinking them in the way Lily's nose crinkled when she smiled, The way Ellen's hands moved quick and sure, echoes of a life he'd lost and found. The years had carved a canyon between them, but here, in this kitchen, the edges were softening, the rift narrowing with every bite, every word. Later, as the sun climbed higher, Caleb found Hank on the porch, the Strat across his lap, fingers hovering over the strings. The air was crisp, the yard streaked with dew that glittered like scattered glass, and the breeze carried the faint lowing of cattle from the fields beyond. Caleb leaned against the rail, hands in his pockets. "Mind a shadow?" he asked, voice easy. "Never," Hank said, a small smile tugging his lips. He plucked a soft note, the sound warm against the morning chill. "Oh, you more than I can reckon, Caleb. You didn't just marry my girl, you hauled her daddy out of the dark." Caleb shook his head, voice steady. "You were clawing your way back to her. Hank, I just tossed you a rope. That riff? It was always heading home." Hank's fingers paused, his eyes meeting Caleb's, fierce and raw. "You didn't just toss a rope, you tied it round us all. You're family now, son, and family don't let go." Caleb's throat bobbed, but he nodded, a quiet pact sealed in the silence. "She's my everything," he said, "and you're part of that now, always will be." The riff picked up again, a slow, steady growl, threading through the air like a vow renewed, and they sat there, the notes weaving a bridge between past and present. Inside, Lily and Ellen laughed over the sink, their voices spilling through the screen door, a melody of their own. For the first time in years, Hank felt the pieces slotting back, not seamless, not yet, but close enough to hum. He'd been a shadow, a riff without a root, but now he was here, tethered by strings that bound him tight. Summer draped Nashville in a cloak of heat, thick and shimmering, the kind that turned the air into a molasses haze and baked the streets till they steamed. On the city's south side, where the sprawl gave way to forgotten corners, Hank Sullivan stood before a crumbling warehouse, a relic of brick and rust, its windows shattered like broken teeth, its walls scrawled with graffiti in colors long faded. The place was a husk, abandoned by time and trade, but to Hank, it was a canvas, a dream stitched from scars and strings. Beside him, Lily and Caleb unloaded a pickup piled with lumber and paint cans, their laughter slicing through the drone of cicadas, a spark against the stillness. Hank wiped sweat from his brow, his leather jacket swapped for a faded tee, the denim of his jeans patched at the knees. He hefted a toolbox from the truck bed, the metal clanging soft in the heat. "This old heap looks like it's one stiff breeze from collapsin'," he said, a grin tugging his lips as he glanced at Lily. "Sure we ain't dreamin' too big. Sugar?" Lily adjusted her ball cap, blonde braids swinging, her green eyes glinting with fire. "Daddy, we've climbed steeper hills than this," she said, voice steady and fierce. "You made it through the streets, we can tame a fixer-upper." Caleb chuckled, hauling a plank over his shoulder, his brown hair damp under his hat. "She's right, Hank. Plus, you've got me swinging a hammer, how bad can it go?" "Plenty bad," Hank teased, but his grin widened, warmth blooming in his chest. "Let us get crackin'." The seed had sprouted that morning after the wedding, over coffee and cornbread, when the weight of lost years pressed heavy but sparked a fire. Hank had sat with his girls, the riff of Lily's tune still humming in his bones, and felt a purpose claw its way up. "I've been running on fumes too long," he told them, voice rough but resolute. "Out there, folks kept me afloat, strays like me, forgotten. I want to give 'em something back, not just a riff, but a shot at something real." Lily had leaned in, her hand on his. "Then let us do it, Daddy, together. You always said music ties folks tight, let us make it a lifeline." Caleb had nodded, his jaw set. "You're not alone in this, Hank. We'll build it something that sticks." They christened it Riff Haven, a sanctuary not just for shelter, but for souls with music as its heartbeat. A place to learn, to play, to mend. The warehouse came cheap, a city cast off they scraped together with donations, savings, and every nickel they could muster. Months of plotting followed, nights hunched over sketches at the kitchen table, Lily mapping rooms, Caleb bartering with suppliers, but now they stood here, boots in the dirt, breaking ground. Inside, the air was musty, thick with dust that danced in shafts of light piercing the busted windows. Hank dropped the toolbox with a thud, the echo rolling off bare concrete. "Start with the walls," he said, rolling up his sleeves, the old mill scars faint on his forearms. "Gotta seal it up for the weather turns." They dove in paint rollers, slapping color over faded tags, hammers driving nails into fresh frames, the warehouse groaning like it was waking up. Lily hummed as she worked, snatches of old riffs Hank had taught her, her voice a bright thread in the dust. Caleb hauled junk to a dumpster out back, shirt soaked through, tossing quips to keep him going. "If this roof caves," he called, wrestling a warped beam, "I'm blammin' your old man's hammer skills, Lil." "Blame your own swing," she shot back, grinning, paint flecking her cheek. "You're the muscle here." Hank watched them, a quiet glow spreading through him. This was his blood, his kin, building something bigger than themselves. By dusk, one wall stood painted, a deep sage that caught the fading light, and they slumped onto crates, passing a jug of sweet tea, ice clinking against the tin. "It's a start," Hank said, wiping his brow with a rag. "Gonna take a heap more, though." "We'll get there," Lily said, fierce as ever. "Step by step, Daddy." The seasons turned fall-esque crisp bite, winter-esque chill, spring-esque thaw, and Riff Haven rose, slow but stubborn. Volunteers trickled in Earl and Dot from the shelter days, their hands steady despite the years, and new faces drawn by word of mouth. Hank hit the streets again, not to drift, but to play. The Strat S case opened for coins he funneled back into the dream. He de-strummed Lily's tune under bar lights, telling his tale between Riff's lost years, a sound that found him home and folks listened. A local TV crew caught wind one night, aired a piece that spread like wildfire, and donations rolled in small checks, crumpled bills, enough to patch the roof and frame the walls. By summer's return, the warehouse was reborn. The brick glowed under fresh paint, windows gleamed new. The main room a wide, warm sprawl with polished floors and walls in soft blues and golds. A kitchen hummed out back smells of chili and cornbread wafting through, while upstairs held cots for those needing a night's reprieve. But the soul was the music room. A nook with rugs, mismatched chairs, and a low stage, guitars lining the walls, a battered upright piano in the corner. Hank stood there on opening day, throat tight as folks poured in old shelter hands like Earl, fresh faces with wary eyes, all drawn to the promise of something solid. "Welcome to Riff Haven," he said, voice rough but clear over the chatter, the Strat slung over his shoulder. "This ain't just a roof, it's a place to find your footing. We've got grub, beds, and music. Stick round, see what it's got for ya." He hit the strings, Lily's tune roaring out, electric and fierce, and the room hushed. Earl tapped a beat on his knee, Dot swayed, and a girl, Mia, skinny with braids and a gap-toothed grin, edged closer, eyes wide. When the riff faded, she tugged his sleeve. "Mr. Hank, can I try that?" "You bet, kiddo," he said, handing her the Strat, guiding her small hands to the strings. "It's yours to play now." Mia fumbled the chords, giggling as Hank adjusted her grip, and soon others joined, kids plucking tentative notes, adults thumping rhythms on tables. Lily taught a group scales on the piano, her laugh ringing out, while Caleb hauled trays of biscuits from the kitchen. It wasn't tea, flawless arguments flared. Funds dipped low, but it breathed. Riff Haven became a heartbeat, a place where Earl swapped budgeting tips with folks starting fresh, where Dot patched coats and spun yarns, where Hank's riff wove it all tight. One evening, Mia darted up, braids bouncing. "Mr. Hank, I made one." She strummed a clumsy riff, a little snarl of her own, grinning wide. "This mine, listen." Hank's eyes burned, voice thick. "That S.A. Butte, Mia. Keep that fire going." She beamed, scampering off, and Lily slid beside him, arm looping through his. "You're mendin' folks, Daddy," she said, soft but sure, "like you always wanted." He shook his head, humble. "We are, sugar. You and Caleb, you're the soul of it." Winter tested them, pipes froze, bills stacked, but they pressed on. By spring, Riff Haven was a fixture, its echoes rippling out. A kid who found her growl in a guitar, a man who strummed his way to a job, a woman who turned silence into chords. Hank taught daily guitar, riffs. Whatever they take his room, a chaos of off-key notes and bright laughs. Lily's tune became the anthem, played by hands young and old, a sound that held them up. One dusk, as the sun sank low, Hank stood outside, the warehouse's fresh paint gleaming in the twilight. Lily and Caleb joined him, coffee mugs in hand, watching kids chase fireflies across the patched lot. "We did it," Hank said, voice low with awe. "Never thought I'd see something like this standin'." "You earned it," Caleb said, firm. "Every riff you played built this." Hank smiled, the tune humming in his throat. It wasn't just his sound anymore, it was theirs. A redemption carved from strings and grit. A haven rising where he'd once fallen. Spring unfurled over Nashville with a tender grace. The kind that softened the city's rough edges and coaxed green from its cracked seams. Riff Haven stood tall on the south side, its brick walls weathered but proud. A lighthouse in the morning glow. The lot out front, once a snarl of weeds and shattered glass, now stretched smooth with fresh sod, dotted with picnic tables and a wobbly swing set salvaged from a junkyard sale. On this bright morning, the air thrummed with life, kids shrieking as they chased a frisbee, adults milling with plates of ribs and slaw, the smoky tang of a barbecue pit mingling with the sweetness of blooming dogwoods. Hank Sullivan stood at the heart of it, his Fender Stratocaster slung across his chest, silver hair glinting under a faded cap, the riff of Lily's tune poised on his fingertips. Time had carved deeper grooves into him, lines etched around his eyes, a stoop in his shoulders from old scars, but his hazel gaze burned with a quiet fire as he struck the strings. The crowd, folks from the shelter, neighbors, strays who found a home here, gathered in a loose arc, their chatter fading as the riff roared out, electric and fierce, a rock blues snarl that danced through the breeze. Lily stood beside him, her blonde hair streaked with a few silvers now, her arm around a little girl, all curls and giggles, her daughter Sadie. Caleb flanked them, a toddler perched on his shoulders, Jasper, named for Hank's middle name, his brown hair mussed by the wind. They built a life here, a family woven into Riff Haven's bones. And today was a celebration, years of grit blooming into something unbroken. Hank's fingers moved with a grace honed by decades, the riff a thunder that didn't falter despite the tremble in his joints. Kids like Mia, now a wiry 13, braids swapped for a short crop, swayed along, her own guitar slung low, mimicking his chords. Earl tapped a rhythm on his knee, his frame thinner but his grin sharp, while Dot clapped from a lawn chair, her rasp cutting through with a cheer. The tune wasn't Hank's alone anymore, it belonged to them all, a lifeline strung through every soul who walked these floors. As the riff peaked, voices joined a ragged chorus of kids and old-timers, their notes rough but true, a hum, a holler, a harmony rising over the city's hum. Lily's hand squeezed his arm, her voice soft against the fade. "Listen to that, Daddy," she said, eyes shining. "You built something that sings." Hank shook his head, humble as ever, the Strat's buzz settling. "We did, sugar," he said, voice a low growl laced with wonder. "All of us together." He looked out, Earl's nod, Das wink, Mia's grin. A sea of faces tied by his sound, and his throat tightened. Didn't he figure I'd live to hear this? Caleb set Jasper down, the boy toddling off with a squeal, and clapped Hank's shoulder. "You earned every damn note, man," he said, steady and sure. "Every cold night, every riff, it brought you right here." Hank's lips twitched, a tear brimming but held back. "Too bullheaded to quit, I reckon." The day rolled on, ribs sizzling on the grill Caleb tended, kids smearing paint on a mural along the back wall, a pickup band of Riff Haven grads jamming on the porch with twang and grit. Hank moved through it, slower now, his joints creaking like an old barn door, but alive with a purpose that pulsed in his veins. He paused by Mia, who was teaching Sadie a clumsy chord, the Strat dwarfing her small frame. "Look at you, hotshot," he said, ruffling Mia's hair. "Gonna steal my thunder soon?" "Nah, Mr. Hank." Mia laughed, her grin wide. "You're the king, I'm just keeping up." Sadie giggled, plucking a string that twanged off key. "Papa, play my song." "Always, darlin'," Hank said, crouching stiffly to strum a quick riff, her squeal a burst of sunlight in his chest. It echoed Lily at that age, those lost years, a faint scar now, stitched over by this. Later, as the sun dipped low, gilding the sky in hues of ember and rose, Hank took the stage again, a low platform they hammered together last summer, weathered but steady. The crowd settled, kids sprawled on blankets, adults leaning against tables, the air rich with smoke and the tang of sweet tea. Lily and Caleb stood close, Sadie on Lily's hip, Jasper tugging Caleb's jeans. Hank adjusted the mic, hands steady despite the ache, and spoke, voice rough but resonant over the rustle of leaves. Years back, this place was a pipe dream, he said, eyes sweeping the faces, some familiar, some new, all part of this tapestry. I was a man unmoored, didn't he know my own name, didn't he know where I fit. But I had a riff and it hauled me home to my girls, to why all. Riff Haven ain't just brick and boards. This every one of you who walked through, picked up a guitar, found a piece to hold. This is for you. He hit Lily's tune slow, deliberate, the notes ringing out like a vow kept. Lily joined, her fingers tapping the rhythm on Sadie's back, then Caleb's low hum, then Mia's sharp chords. One by one, the crowd caught at Earl's gravelly beat. Das off-key clap, kids stumbling over the tempo they learned by heart. It swelled, a wave of sound that drowned the city's drone, raw and radiant, a chorus of the broken made whole. Hank's eyes burned, tears slipping free as he played, his heart thundering with a joy too big to hold. This was at the end of a road he walked blind, the dawn of something he never dared dream. The last note hung, trembling in the air, and he set the strat down, hands shaking as he turned to Lily. She threw her arms around him, Sadie squished between, and Caleb pulled them in, Jasper clinging to his leg. I'm home, Hank choked out, voice fracturing. For good this time. The crowd erupted, not just claps, but whoops, hollers, a roar that shook the earth, a love too loud to contain. Lily sobbed into his shoulder. You never really left us, Daddy. Caleb's grip tightened, eyes wet, and Ellen watching from the porch, apron still tied, smiled through tears, years of grief melting into peace. Dusk deepened, stars prickling the sky like notes on a stave, and Riff Haven glowed laughter, riffs, the clink of jars raised high. Hank sat with his family, the tune a quiet hum in his throat, no longer a cry into the void but a song of roots sunk deep. He'd been lost, a riff without a name, a man adrift, but he found his way, through every string, every frozen night, every face that carried him here. The sound had brought him home, and now it rang in voices young and old, in a haven that never stopped playing. As fireflies blinked and the last chords faded, Hank looked out his people, his purpose, and knew this was both an end and a beginning. The riff wasn't his alone anymore. It was theirs, a legacy strung tight, a home in every note. Dear friend, if the story touches your heart, don't let it go. Hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more of our stories. Drop in the comments, what does this story mean to you right now? We're dying to hear your wildest emotions. Let's keep this tune alive together. Thanks for coming along. There's more to come, so stay tuned.